got in our crew, and we're between a couple of snowstorms here. They say there's a little more coming tomorrow, so we're lucky tonight. Last week we covered the opening presentation of the actual extraction process, the techniques of mining, something of the mechanization. And in part we can't divide this session from that one. In many places it will be a continuation. You may have questions that left over from last time that you could continue with today, or other people's comments. We also have a somewhat different level of management person and a quite different experience in the management person who's going to present things tonight. Last week we were very fortunate in having Mr. Hudak, who's General Superintendent of Mountaineer Coal Company, as they say, a division of Consol, which is a part of Continental Oil. And tonight we have Mr. Larry Jackson, who is the Superintendent of Granttown Mine, and that is part of Eastern Associate Coal, which is not part of a big conglomerate or oil company, but is related to Eastern Gas, which also owns Boston Gas Company and is its parent headquarters of that. In both cases, the immediate operational headquarters were in Pittsburgh for Consol Coal Division and for Easterns. Mr. Jackson has a different background, and that'll be apparent to you as soon as he begins to speak, because he worked for 16 years from the time he was 17 years old in English coal mines. He began work in Yorkshire, which is one of the major coal fields in England, which I didn't visit when I was over there. And he is also uniquely experienced in longwall mining. It would be very difficult to find anyone else that we could present to you who would have had as much experience in longwall mining. And the reason for this is that in our country you could hardly have encountered longwall mining at the time he began on it. But in England it already existed, so that he began on longwall mining, which was only in Germany and in England and certain European countries at that time. I might be wrong. There might have been some experimental ones over here, but there was no, as far as I understand, any real production in longwall at that time. That doesn't mean that that'll be all he'll talk with you about. I think we'll get a different presentation along with a very valuable one that Mr. Hudak gave us last week. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Jackson to you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. I'd like to thank Mr. Ross, first of all, for inviting me to participate in this course. I'm very flattered. Fine college like Fairmont State is, you want an Englishman to come and do a little bit of a talk. But I do sincerely thank you. Last week I made a point of being here to listen to Mr. Hudak, and I was like to say on the stage, to find out who you're going to follow and what kind of an act you've got to follow. And I found that listening to Mr. Hudak, I got a pretty difficult act to follow. Well, there he goes. He's an English border. Last week Mr. Hudak talked about reserves of coal. He told us how much reserves there was in the United States, West Virginia, what the production figures were for West Virginia, even production figures for the United States. He told us also about production outlooks, what we were now getting, what we were anticipating getting in future years, and what we have to get to meet the energy crisis that this country faces right now. He talked about the development of coal mines, and he talked mainly on the conventional mining systems that we use in the United States. We start in the United States and they're still hand loading. Very, very small amounts. There's conventional mining, which is the loading where they shoot the coal, they cut the coal and shoot the coal, and then load with the load machine. Then we progressed and got to the point where we're using continuous miners. But it wasn't no longer necessary to shoot the coal, but the mining machine itself just goes in and rips the coal out of the face. He explained briefly about ventilation of a coal mine, how important this is, and that it is a major job of ventilating a coal mine. He talked about transportation, rails, and belt haulage. Tonight, I would like to concentrate a little bit, and not to get too technical, or not too detailed. I would like to talk more on longwall mining than any other system. And before I do talk, I have a film here, which I found very difficult to find a film in this country that can really give you a good representation of longwall mining. And there's a very brief excerpt in this film that does depict longwall mining. And I'm going to run the whole film. It's the kind of film that we use right now in orientation programs. And that is for the new miners coming into the industry. They're put in a week program. They go into school for 4 days actually, and receive classroom work and receive underground visits to the mine just to see what they're getting into. And this is one of the films that we show them. It's called Coal. It starts out by showing you a lot of the products that come from coal. I'm sure you'll be interested in the coal film. So I decided that I would run it. It's a little bit long. It runs, I think, about 25 minutes. But I'm not sure you'll be interested. But before I even go to the film, I would like to just look at this map first of all and tell you that this map is, as you people know it, and as Mr. Ross announced it, it's Grantown Mine. Its actual mine is Federal Number 1 for Eastern Associated Coal Corporation. But everybody knows it as Grantown Mine. And Grantown is right here. This is the Grantown portal right here. This is where all the coal comes out of Federal Number 1 mine. First of all, Federal Number 1 mine started right here, and it started in 1900. Now we talked last week that Loveridge was putting in, I believe he said 1956, 57. This mine started in 1900. Go down that shaft right here, the roadways are this wide. And you can see the marks on the ridge where men hacked it with a pick and a shovel to develop this coal mine. And it started way back in the 1900s. You can see it's progressed. Right now it covers roughly 48 square miles of property right here. If you check the contours on the surface, there's a heck of a lot more. I was telling me that West Virginia is the largest state in the Union that you could lay flat out. Anyway, from here they progressed. There's all this working down in this area. They progressed and they put a shaft in right here, which is now called Keystone Shaft. I don't know if anybody's familiar. I figure most people are familiar with the area I'm talking about. But this is Keystone Shaft right here. And right now here is the surface installation for all the supplies. All the supplies go into this portal and are transported via this dark black line, which is the trap hole, coming all the way in the mine to all the working sections. And here are all the working sections in this Grantown mine. I don't have a thing producing coal from this point all the way down here. But this coal mine has to be maintained. This is its lifeline. This is the way the supplies come in and the coal comes out. All the coal comes down this track, right down to here. You see where it's coming on to a rotary dump. Every car is dumped right there, and with the skip shaft and the preparation plant right on the surface here. At this point, as I say, all the working sections are there. So we have a shaft right here, which is a ventilation shaft. We have a shaft right here. This is called eddy shaft. It's new installation. I moved to Federal 1 in 1969. This portal has been open just over a year and a half. It's a relatively new portal. Prior to that, all the men went in down here. So here is the main facilities for the men, the bathhouse and so forth. And they transported them with all these dark lines to all the various sections in this coal mine. To briefly run through the number of sections that we operate. We have an operation right here in these mains. Can you see over there? Maybe better like over here. We have a section operating in these mains. We're taking these mains out to this black line you see right here, which is my property line. That property line, you can follow it all the way around. Here, for someone no reason, it's really jagged. This is Fairview, right here. This is the Fairview Reserve. That coal isn't mine, it's supposed to be. We have another section working right here. He's advancing on the solid. He'll couple through on the back end, he'll tap into the mains, and then he'll retreat mine, taking all this coal back out here. We have another section working up in here, and this is our short wall. I'll talk more about the short wall towards the end of the program. So this is the short wall. Right above the short wall here we have another section which is operating, and it's developing for the short wall. We have another miner right here, and this is number 20 miner, and he's working right now. He's starting the panel right here. I got problems with that. Let me digress just a little bit right here, for those who are interested. There's a common knowledge in the Pittsburgh scene that the north-south plane is weak plane. It's better like it's true. All the facts and figures that I can get on it, you have problems holding entries that run north-south. Now this is north, this is south. So these entries are always difficult to maintain. Proved exactly right in here, because from this point, these completely cave. Beyond recovery. You can't get in there at all. So everybody said, well, the theory is right, north-south, you can't mine. So we broke off the 60-degree angle from north-south, cut across north-south, never drive north-south. We proved successful in this case. And we're mining right here, and you can see we're taking out this coal right, coming all the way back. We'll eventually get all that coal out. But when everybody said, well, this is so, then I said, why didn't this fall in? Why didn't this fall in? Why didn't all this main line fall in? Well, there's a case for one and there's a case for another. See, everything's driven north, south, east, west in this coal mine. But everybody says that's the wrong way to do it. But we've been doing it for 74 years. It didn't help, I've got to say that. That's the only thing I will say for the north-south here. We have another one right here. We've got a miner developing right here. He's ready now to come across here and couple in, and here he will make our long wall. Unfortunately, our long wall retreated out of here before we had this one ready. So right now my long wall sits here, pulled off the face, and is waiting to go onto this section and be installed here to start pulling another long wall panel. And I'll talk more about that one later too. We have another section working right here, 13. He's already covering back. Taking this coal back out, both sides of it, coming back out of here. We have 14 miner working right in here. He went. There's a very interesting fact about the mine. And now he's covering this small pocket of coal right here. See the black line right here, which is on my property. My property line is right here. But here is a known fault. This area is barren. No coal whatsoever. We hit white rock. I'm told. This was way before my time. And here they said is where you lost it. So they broke a dotted line and gave a projection as to where they anticipated that fault to go. And this is backed by the fact that this property here shows the fault line in here. We've seen their maps and it shows that it's coming into this area. But yet we mined down here expecting to hit the fault. And we never did. And we mined all the way to there. And we got so far in there that our belts weren't long enough to hold the coal back. So we had to stop. We've got to pillar this piece of coal. And we may have to put another belting, but we need to go and find out where that coal is. We've got a borehole right there, and that borehole logs at no coal. But we've got beautiful coal right there. We may go to all the trouble and expense of putting another belt into there. And the first cut of coal will hit a fault. We don't know. We've drilled ahead, we're not going to hit it the first cut. We have drilled ahead and we can't find any fault right now. So it's opened up a new field for Federal number 1, and we're expecting short panels and little prospects of long walling. Now it's opened up a long panel, and this can be maintained in here. We've got more long wall country than we ever had. This side of the mine is relatively free from gas and oil wells. See the little squares? These dots that you see are drills. These are core samples where you're proving the seam of coal. But every one that's got a little square around it, all these, denotes a gas or an oil well. Like Mr. Hudak explained last week, there's roughly 10,000 tons of coal in that little square, and you have to leave it to support the gas or oil well. Now we're fast approaching this side, what is known right here as the Fairview oil field. We're already into it right here. And you can see every little square on here is where I've left coal, or where I will have. Now look here. That's an engineer's nightmare. Trying to get fences to go through. I lost an engineer last week. I wondered if maybe that's what running on. It is a problem. We're starting on a program right now. I've no authority on it, and I've got little experience with it, of plugging these wells. This is being done by the Bureau of Mines. Mr. Joe Cassini is in charge of it down in Morgantown. And you couldn't wish to work with a better guy, as far as I'm concerned. I work with him, and we plugged this well right here. But we plugged it after we developed around it. And then when we came back, we tried to go through our developments and just go and take part of that gas well out. But our developments told us the bottom so bad, pre-developed on our roof conditions, that we had such bad experience with the roof control that we had to abandon that part of the face and come around it. So now we're anticipating short walls in here, and that well right there is already plugged. The Bureau of Mines plugged this well for us. And we will develop here, and we will cut right through that well. We'll just bring everything out. We'll take the whole coal out and everything. So far, I'm not sure, but I think they've cut through 2 gas wells. And I don't know whether they're in this stage or not. I think they're in Illinois. 2, both in this stage, yeah. They've already cut through 2 in this stage and been very successful with it. If this works, look at the different picture it puts to me. What do they plug it? They plug it with a cement, an expanding type cement.
Does that mean, are these wells, all the resources from it, have they all been used?
Yes, yes. These are all abandoned wells. If it is an active well, it's usually got very little life left. There's very little oil life left in this field right here. It's in what they call second extraction stage. They've gone and dynamited a lot of them and fractured these wells, sandblasted to open up fissures to get as much out as they possibly can. This field is just about dry. It's difficult now, as it was just a year ago, to get that very small producing well. The large coal companies, and right here Penn's Oil owns most of these. Right now, at one time, they would give you the well. They just give it to you, because they would have to abandon that well and plug it themselves. And rather than go to that expense to give it to the coal company, now they won't. They want an arm and a leg for it because it can produce a little bit of oil. You can understand why. The whole picture's changed in 2 years. But it's something new. It's something that we've got to look at. The coal industry's got to look at it. It's not just the Bureau of Mines. We've got to look at it. Because as engineer, prior to being superintendent, I was engineer at this mine. And I was did just to find out roughly how much coal we've left behind us. And I counted all these little squares, calculated all the tonnage. And from here down to the start of this coal mine, we've left 5 years of work behind us. If we just took all the 10,000 tons out of all these blocks of coal, we would have worked 5 years longer to get to that point. And that was based on the annual production we were taking in that mine at that time. Federal One is one of the largest coal mines in the United States. There's no way possible to go back. No way possible. All this area you see shaded behind means it's been been recovered, pillared out. All the extractions taken place possible from here down. The only area of the coal you see is this white area. It's available for me. Designed to mine. Pardon? It's to support the gas or oil well. If we were to go too near to the gas or oil well, we could penetrate the gas or oil well, which is dangerous. And if we get too close to it, we could also fracture the well, we could cause the well to cave. And they have the right to go through our property as well. But one of the biggest hazards in a gas and an oil well, we leave this block of coal around. It is 200 feet by 200 feet. But in the days when these were plotted, you read the logs on these wells and it will say this well is located, how do they word it? We can talk about a fence post. It's from Farmer Jones's fence post, 25 paces west, and it's a nightmare to locate these wells. You'll locate the area that they tell you on the plot, but you cannot find the well. We'll go in with dozers and doze the surface off, trying to find it. When we do find it, it might be way over somewhere else. So if we've got one of these wells that we've got located, I said this one right here, we have our own number on it, 468 right here. If that's not right where I said, if that's over this way somewhere, there's a chance I could run into that. If it's a gas well, there's a chance that we could blow the place up. We have got to keep away. And if we go in and find the well on the surface and plug it, we've eliminated the hazard. We've also increased the reserve of Federal 1. We've also increased the reserve of the United States.
That's not time to attention to read it. Well, they gave it up for granted. It's off the log line.
That's right. We've got wells. In fact, in Federal number 1, while I've worked there, we cut into 2 wells. Fortunately, no hazard in place. But both wells were not logged. They were not identified to us on the surface anywhere. We didn't know that existed. We cut into wells. And these are what we call the wildcat holes that a lot of the old timers built.
A lot of times, sometimes they think the wells too. The old days, when you get crackers, they could be in the pool, and one just keep the rig open.
And just set the rig over.
They were involved.
That's right. And the first one might have well come through the cold season. But he lost his tool down the hole, he can't recover it, so he just moves over 10 feet and starts another one. Maybe he's successful this time. These are some of the problems.
Yes.
This is one of the largest mines in the United States. And I couldn't tell you. In the United States, you know, very far away from it, right here, I would say. I don't know for sure. I don't know of a coal mine larger.
When you say largest, are you talking about in reserve, or are you talking about in production, or are you talking about in mines for
I'm talking about a 48 square miles of coal mine. I wish it was the largest producer.
Well, wasn't it at one time?
It was at one time.
I thought of that.
At one time, the signs have been taken down. I don't know who took them down, but the signs approaching Grantown was the home of the largest producing soft coal mine in the United States. It did bear that name for a long time. All the black lines you see near the track haulage, all the loops you see is where the cars turn around, going through a loading point, and to that point the coal is hauled by belt. From the point, these points where all these loops are, that is where coal is hauled by belt to that point, and then track haulage to this point. Here's the place we store all our loads. And we have 50-ton locomotives, massive things, that haul the coal from this point all the way down, around to Grantown, and to our rotary dump. Return back with empties and into here. From this point to this point right here, we have a single track. I've got double track here. I've got double track all the way from here down into Grantown. Why, I don't know. Nobody ever developed a second track through here. If anything happens at any one point on this track, Federal number 1 mine closes down. I was made superintendent in August of 73. In September of 73, I closed the coal mine down for a stretch of haulage which was hazardous in here. And I closed the coal mine down for 2 weeks. contacted me. I said, I wouldn't run through it, so nobody else can. I closed the coal mine for 2 weeks, repaired that haulage, and then put the mine back in service. Since that time, I closed the coal mine down for 3 days. The coal mine forced me here, the roof fell in right here. But it closed the artery of the coal mine, fell at that intersection. Our 3 days production there. Right now, I'm in the process. I've started here and I'm working this way. And I'm going to start working this way, developing a second haulage right through all that area.
How many miles away from?
Through here?
Yeah.
This is, as near as I can tell you now, I'm measuring about 6,000 feet. If you would to give you some idea, the haulage from here all the way in this coal mine to that point right there, that's the farthest point I've got to haul, is 8 miles. 8 miles, one way.
Is that other area that you're going to put a track in fairly clean, or is it fallen, or is it
Falling all the way.
clean?
Right now. I'm going to clean everything. It's all slate. Don't produce the piece of line. I've got equipment there working all the time, and then no coal, very little coal. Not worth trying to salvage it.
They're very wet.
No. I've got a wet area down in here, but that's not a problem. This problem on the existing track, when I go through the side, I'm going to get high, eliminate the water on that track.
When you use standard bolting, is there
We're using standard bolting down in this area. Does anybody know what resin bolt is? It's obviously resin bolt has been tried in federal number 1 line. I'm using it right now. Resin bolt is good. It really is. It really helped us. But fortunately, I did have experience with resin bolts in England. We used very extensively in England and very extensively in France and Germany. But conditions haven't dictated resin bolting anywhere until I got into this section. Now this is the one that's pre-development for the long wall. Like I say, the long wall is without a home right now because we couldn't develop fast enough. We had such bad geological conditions to contend with. Roof falling in, couldn't hold this roof. And here, I started roughly here where you see the 90 going across. I converted to resin bolting. And I have resin bolting from here all the way in, and now I'm coming across this space right here. And it's done a good job.
You explain about resin bolt.
Resin bolt. The difference between a resin bolt and a roof bolt, a mechanical roof bolt. I'm going to put some shorts. We drill the hole in the roof. There's the roof. And we put a mechanical bolt. Let me show a mechanical bolt. It's got an anchor block right here. I won't draw detail, but it's got an anchor block right in here. Got a thin rod, we can thread it through the anchor rod, down into the hole. Got a plate on the bottom right here. We install that, we tighten this up at the bottom, the anchor spreads, grips into the side. And what you're doing here actually, strength of the beam is equal to square root of the cross. So you're actually mounting all these different layers of strata, you're tightening them all together, and you're making it into one. Okay? You put a 2-inch board down, and it will bend. You put 2 2-inch boards down, it won't bend. You tie them together. Okay? You're strengthening the beam above you. But what can happen in this this kind of thing, you can get lateral movement taking place in the hole because all you've got is this 5/8 rod right through here. So the hole is actually all open. And lateral movement can start taking place in this hole right here. You can let the roof, the beds can start doing this. With resin bolt, we drill our hole right in the roof. We use a smaller hole. It's only a 1-inch diameter hole that we put in there. First thing we do is we put 2 cartridges. We drill a 6-foot hole and we put 2 cartridges. It's a catalyst. We've got 2 compartments in these place. And then you shove a rod in here, just much the same as this one, and just penetrate with the roof bolt machine right into that and bust them by it. You've got the same thing on the bottom, you've got a plate on the bottom with the bolt. You agitate that with a catalytic action which sets up just like steam engine. And this hole now is solid. The whole length of the hole is solid. You keep it up, and hold it tight, it sets in about 20-25 seconds. You agitate it for 20 seconds, you hold it for 20-25 seconds, and it sets. And now you've strengthened the beam, you've still strengthened the beam like we did here. You've also prevented a lot of the lateral movement that can take place in the top. It's going to marvelously up for Federal 1 on 19 section. And I know coal mines that have said that the coal mines are ready to abandon it. They can't hold the roof up. Now it's producing coal because of this system right here. It's approved by the Bureau of Mines, approved by the State Department of Mines. It gets their blessing every time we do it. Quite a revolution for the American coal field. Once again, up and down cried the American engineer. But it's been used for a long, long time in Europe. We suddenly start to get it right here. Now, I better not pull the American engineer. I became a citizen this year, and I'm an American engineer now. Has anybody got any questions about Federal number 1 mine? Okay, well, maybe we'd like to see the movie, and then I'll talk a little bit on one wall. Stick to long wall. What long wall developed, and that it came with the short wall. Why short wall came in? What we were looking for when we brought short wall into Federal number 1. And the short wall at Federal number 1, we had the honour of being the first in the United States, first short wall. But let's start with long walling. Long walling started in the United States, and I don't have any records of anything prior to this, in roughly 1960. And Easton were the ones that pioneered long walls then. Started long walls down in the southern part of West Virginia, in the lower seams of coal, and basically used what you saw in the movie, the plow, which extracts 4-5 inches of coal as the plow goes across each face. It developed, first of all, in England and Germany, primarily in Germany. England were maybe the second people in the field. And like Mr. Ross said, I started in coal mining in November '51, and I started long wall. Long walling was already the only system of mining in England. There's very little pillar work. In fact, no hand loading, no conventional mining whatsoever. But one of the first problems that the United States had to overcome when they brought long walls into the country was the fact that they had a lack of technology. They had a lack of people that knew what long walling was all about. So what Easton did to try and overcome that, they said, okay, we'll buy the long wall from England. And they bought a lot from England, they bought a lot from Germany. And they said, we'll buy it on the condition that you will send technical representatives to this country who will show us how to install it and how to operate it. So the companies in England especially were really pleased about this, because England has got it's got to do a lot of export trade to meet its economy. If England doesn't export, then it will suffer. It's suffering right now, I know. But it has to export. It can't live on its own resources, and it can't just import. So they were glad to get the export trade, so they were only too pleased to send over the technology, which they had in abundance, actually. This attracted other engineers, myself being one. So a wide open field in the United States, and decided that there's a new way of life and maybe more prospects in the United States. And this is what attracted me to join Easton, the fact that I had the long wall knowledge that they had wanted, and the fact that it was an adventure. I suppose a little bit of an adventure in us all, and I decided that I'd be an adventurer and I'd come to the United States. I've never ruled it for 1 minute. I've been home once for a vacation, and I don't want to go back. England's in worse shape than what the United States is. But my parents are still alive, and of course I like to go see them. I encourage them to come here now. But this overcome the problem for the United States. These engineers were willing to come. They came and they installed long walls, and they enlisted other people like myself. Some of the advantages of long walling is that it's safe. It's a safe system of mining. The records at Federal 1 and back there. Got a very low accident frequency on our long wall compared to other sections. The men work under a canopy of steel. The roof is virtually a canopy of steel, in which all the men work under this canopy. It reduces waste. And why this? I'm saying that in a pillar of coal, talk about this pillar of coal right here, which has been mined with a conventional mining, continuous mining, and retreated back. We estimate we got 65% of that coal right there. This one, which we long wall, we estimate that we get 90% of the coal, 90% plus. We lose the 10% and we release 6-8 inches of coal roof, which helps to support the unconsolidated shale which is immediately above us. So this is a feature right through Federal 1. There's an average of 8 inches of coal left in the roof. You don't extract all the coal. 8 inches helps support that roof above you. So this improved the recovery of Federal 1. It improves the recovery out of anybody's mine that can use a long wall. It's got a continuous haulage system. The coal is produced at the face. Coal is immediately put onto a conveyor. That coal is transported off the face, down the belt line to the railroad, to the mine car, continuing its haulage right out of the mine. It's never transported from the machine to another haulage system and then transported and then dumped out again like we do in the shuttle car. It's continuous haulage right outside. It's got positive ventilation. It's difficult to ventilate these kind of places where you've got pillars all over. You've got to use a lot of check curtains and stoppings and deflect all the air into the right place and cross your gob line and back down your return and have your bleeder system working. On a long wall, the air goes up the entry, across the face, splits back to your bleeders and returns down this side. It's positive. You don't have to use checks. The checks, all the checks that's necessary are done on the development. To mine the coal back, you've got very little problem other than checking your ventilation. Make sure you've got no methane buildup. The methane problem is virtually eliminated. There is very little problems on methane. This is the experience we've had in Federal 1. Clear face all the time. Another advantage is it's got less manpower. So,
how does it
in the fact that you've got a pressure developed, you've got your ventilation coming up the head. Let me look at this one, which is much larger. The ventilation coming up this side right here, going right across the face, and coming down this tail entry right here. The pressure on this gob is such that you've got enough ventilation pressure to hold the gases back, and assume the face is at this point, so this is all gob. You've got enough pressure on there to force the gases back, come out, the tap back here into this regulator, come right into your main returns and split right down to your fan. The ventilation pressure holds it away. Whereas on a pillar and room system where you've got pillars all over, you've got to have checks all over. You've got to push the air this way and across here and back down here and split up here. It's done very efficiently by the American miner, pillaring, what I call pillaring. He's an artist that has been able to ventilate his section. It's damn good. But it's less problems, it's less trouble to ventilate a long wall as against a pillar. It's more economical, which only goes to with the fact that you use less manpower on it. You've got a higher production rate, you've got less manpower, therefore it's much more economical. Some of its disadvantages, and let's not underestimate this first one. This is the major disadvantage to long walls in the United States right now, and that's dust. Dust is a common enemy to the long wall, all long walls. The production of dust. The law requires that we shall not have no more than 2 milligrams per cubic meter of air of respirable dust. Now I'm talking about that's the fine dust that is able to be breathed by man and put it into his lungs. The dust that you see, a big cloud of dust, that's not all respirable dust. There's a lot of large particles that you won't absorb into your lungs. But the respirable dust level has got to be kept down to 2 milligrams. I've worked on long walls that's been having difficulty getting down below 5. Fortunately, Federal 1, when it ceased production on its last long wall panel, was holding 2, but was struggling to hold it. The problem is not overcome at Federal 1, and I maybe shouldn't say that, but that's the truth. It is a problem. We're always looking for new techniques in dust suppression. Dust suppression is not only a problem on long walls, it's a problem all over the industry right now, but it's more of a problem on long walls. Another disadvantage is it requires another machine to develop for it. You can't buy a long wall and tell the thing to start right here and develop these entries, and then develop these entries and couple them together, and then start itself filling out. It can't do that. It can only pillar coat. It can only recover the big block of coal. It has to have the continuous miner, as we talked about, that can develop for it, to develop these entries, to give it the home right here. Another big disadvantage to long walling, especially in the Pittsburgh scene, is the gas and oil wells, like in this block of coal. Unless we can make progress with the plugging of gas and oil wells, there's very little prospect of ever putting a long wall in that panel of coal there. This is why we're anxious to work with the Bureau of Mines and to get the technology necessary to plug wells, so we can put long walls in, we can increase production out of the mine with these systems. There's no way I can put one in there. I've got long wall coal in here because I've got very little gas and oil. It's got no flexibility to go around it.
Seems I read someplace where they were using fly ash at one time, atomic fly ash as well to plug. Is that?
No. Maybe what you read was the fly ash underground seals for sealing mine fires. We did that.
I'm not sure. I was thinking
They did this at Joanne Mine. I don't have the details of how they did it when Joanne Mine was on fire. They drove into the mine and they put fly ash seals in the mine. We did this at Federal 1 prior to Joanne catching fire. We did an experiment there, and I was the engineer at the time. It gave me valuable experience. In this area right here, this is an abandoned area, it's not used right now. We cleaned this area up and we drilled in 3 different locations and sealed the roadways with a fly ash sealer. And this was done by the Bureau of Mines, who provided the money. In other words, we provided the money, the public. And the Bureau of Mines worked with a company called Foster Miller out of Boston, Massachusetts. And they did this work right here and were very successful. We used a fly ash seal, and they topped the fly ash seal with a urethane foam.
you just get the oxygen off there.
Just cut the oxygen off and cut the ventilation off, keep the oxygen off any fire. They used some very sophisticated equipment, and this equipment that was used right here on an experimental basis was used at Joanne with a lot of success. Maybe that's a good subject to talk about next week when Mr. Tisdale is here to talk on safety. And this is why it's done. We'll just take it a little bit further. The reason we talk about drilling into the mine and putting seals in the mine is this work is done from the surface. If we have a fire in the mine and we try to seal that fire, then we go along and we put seals in the entrance. We stop all the air from entering there. When you go in to get into the dogs, air can come around and get to that thing. Okay? Give her out. Tremendous hazard for the men that's working inside the mine. Trying to seal a fire that's in there. Methane's building up, and boom, she blows. Then men don't have much chance of it. This technique here means that the fire isn't out of control. You come outside, you feel the shots, and you go around, you try to isolate, locate that one area from the surface, and make it a much safer operation from there. That's another project. It maybe highlights some of the technology that is being put into the coal fields in today's day. There's a tremendous effort being made to make the coal mines safe. Not only is the Bureau of Mines and the State Department of Mines, but the coal companies are just as interested as these people. There's nobody more interested in safety than I am. I don't care who he is. I hope I've proved it in many cases at Federal 1. I'll close Federal 1 down before I'll hurt 1. I've done it. Well, let's move on now. We've talked mainly about the disadvantages and the advantages of longwalling. Let's explain the map. This section of map that you see right here is on a scale of 100 feet to every inch. This map is on a scale of 500 feet to every inch. And this area right here is the area that I've got enlarged, and it's right here. We started here, and this is why I came to Federal 1 initially. We developed these mains, we developed this track entry right here for a loading point here. We developed 3 entries of this side. We developed 3 entries of this side, coupled across, cutting back into the mains to our main returns right here. We developed our first longwall panel. This is when I arrived. The panel was just being finished developed, right here. My job was to come, install the new longwall that had arrived from England. It's an English longwall we used, but it's also part German in that it had a German machine that worked on it. All the supports, all the conveyors, everything about it was English, except the one machine that was a German. So we installed this. At this point we were able to get into the back end right here. We installed all our equipment right across this space here. This space is 500 feet long. Here to here is 500 feet. Final length is roughly 2,600 feet. That block of coal right there realized 330,000 tons of coal. Mined this out, and during this period right here, in fact it was somewhere in here, Federal number 1 held the world record of production on a longwall face. That longwall right there produced 6,035 tons in 24 hours. Since then, that record has been broken, held somewhere in Pennsylvania now. I don't know the exact figure, but it's up in the 8,000, 9,000 tons in 24 hours. But at the time, the record was in Europe, in German mine. We brought it to the United States right here. It's never left the United States since. I don't figure it will. We progressed. We did really good in this panel. Very little problems in this tail entry, breaking up ahead of us. Nothing that really worried us. So we now developed, while we're mining this piece of coal here, we've got a miner developing these 3 entries right here. This miner develops up to the back end and cuts across. These 3 entries we cut across. This entry fell in. It fell in so bad that we just couldn't get in there and do anything with it. Let me just show that one. That entry just fell in. So we dropped back and we developed another entry right here. Cut through. And we thought, well, we've got as a face this time, we'll set up right here. We came off the face and still the long wall's back here, not ready to move in here yet. And this fell in. But we waited. We didn't want to develop it too soon. This time we went along and we developed another face right here. We came back out and we had a very small fender of coal, very small. And that stayed open for us. There was a lot of support in there, but we managed to get our long wall assembly right there. Once again, we did pretty good coming out of here. We pulled this, and once again, this panel realized something like 330,000 tons of coal. This miner that we're using on here, this longwall machine, it's called a Nykoff shearer, and it's a shearing machine. It takes 2.5 feet of coal at one time. So it starts at one end of the face and just shears off 2.5 feet coal. And that 2.5 feet of coal that we mine off there, we'll realize something like 350 tons. It takes us 25 minutes to mine. We can take something like 5 of these passes in a shift. In an 8-hour shift, we might get 5. So that's 350 times 5. We're talking about 17.5 tons of coal, 1,750. But on an average, we like to think that we can average to 1,200 tons per shift. On average, pick up the depth. Long wall's not working and I'm hurt. I'm not sure I'd have that money. It can realise this. The machine itself, and I'm no artist, but I'm trying to find some kind of photograph or something to show you this, because the film didn't have it, we just had a plough on there. The long wall miner sits on its own conveyor. Forgive the artistry, I'm no artist. It looks like a big box. Here is for a big haulage wheel, with a little idle in pulleys, and here's the haulage chain. Brings it right across the face. And this is anchored at one end and anchored at the other. 500 feet long, so we anchor the haulage chain at this end, and we anchor it right at this end here. This is a hydraulic section right through here which operates this winch. 2 electric motors. On the outside, on the first side here, it's got 2 arms. On the arm, it's got a drum. Bits and pieces. These are the covers. Behind the drum sits the cow. The cow is keep the coal onto the drum. Right here, mine is sitting on an endless conveyor. All the way out to the head, and all the way back to the tail. Twice as long. Pulled by triple strand chains. For another arm, the tail end right here. Again, it's got a drum on there that cuts. Behind that drum sits another cow. Got an arm on that's supported right back, this cow is supported right behind the arm. Now this thing's got an opening right here. It's not feet on the edges of this conveyor. So the coal, if it's produced here, can come underneath the machine and you can coal right up to the machine. This drum is up in the air, and the coal seam, this drum cuts right here. This will be a little bit weird because it cuts a little over half the seam. There's the drum and there's the cow keeping the coal onto it. There's the bench of coal he's leaving. This coal is reproduced, it drops right down here, falls on this conveyor, the cow makes sure that it keeps the coal to it. That's on the conveyor, fall right out to the head. It's on the log conveyor, continues to a cow. The back drum right here is cutting here. He's picking out the bench of coal left by this one. He's also helping to clean up with his lid that left on here. And he's got a cow behind him, which once again pushes all the coal, pushes right into the conveyor here, holding it right underneath the machine, right to the head. The machine will cut 2.5 feet every sheet. It's hauled by this, its own mechanism, its own hydraulic section is right here. The haulage chain which comes right up here and then across the face. Right behind it, right in this area here. Boy, I ain't that good at that. Let me draw it another way. Okay? Here's the machine I've talked about. I'm looking now, cut it right in half down here. Here's the drum. Alright. Here's the conveyor. Right behind us, from right here, is this force. Right over the shield hanging down behind. This is this job. The roof is right here. Held. As the machine goes by, he's now picked up the 2.5 feet of coal right here. And as he goes by, inside here is the ramp. It pushes the conveyor over. This conveyor is in 5-foot sections, such that behind the machine you can do this. Here's the coal face. Here's the 2.5 feet that we've marked. The machine is sitting up here going this way. Right behind we're activating these ramps. Men are pushing this conveyor over. The conveyor being in 5-foot sections is flexible. It just goes right over to the face. Then the man who's pushing the conveyor on just follows the machine. You keep pushing the conveyor over and the machine. The two men follow him, and they've got supports now sitting in this area. They lower it, advance it. They advance it by using the same ram that pushed the conveyor over. It's a double acting ram. They reverse the action and pulls the chock in. They reset the chock back to the roof. This chock advances and is set right here. This one comes up and sits right here. Tapping there around. Next chock is sitting here. And go, it falls. When he brings that in, the pitch breaks in, it'll break off right away. Got what we call a good gobbler. It falls immediately behind the supports. So that's the ideal conditions along there.
Let me just refer to something you said earlier. You talked about leaving 6 inches or 8 inches of coal above,
Yes.
stabilize the roof, but if the roof is just going to fall down right behind you, I don't know how, maybe you can explain it.
Okay. I'm taking the 2.5 feet of coal from here, which is the end of the canopy, to here. Here I've got 6 inches of coal roof that I've talked about. And if I take all that coal out, I remove that coal with the shearer, and immediately I will get this out. The operator loses his control on his horizon, he fouls the roof, he cuts through that coal top, it'll fall in advance of the supports. It'll fall high too. It'll fall to such that it'll work its way off the supports back this way. Leave you sat there with the support, which has got a big mountain of slate on it. When you lower it up to advance it, the whole thing will fall.
What causes it? Because of air?
No, it's just the nature of the roof. It's an unconsolidated shale. It's roughly 30 feet thick, where we are, and then we've got a band of sandstone right above that, which is 10 feet thick. So this is a rough section of this we're seeing over here. We've got conditions where the sandstone will come right down onto the coal seam, and the unconsolidated shale will disappear. This condition now exists right here. We've got no shale here, we've got solid sandstone.
It must be a good job.
It's not that good. It's a so-and-so to bolt. Believe me, you can't drill it. It burns up bits. You'll use 3 and 4 bits in one hole to drill it. It's so hard.
Did you ever run into any problems with kids high pollution around? Return, where you wouldn't have effective breathing?
No. You're talking about now back the bleeding system back this way to this point? No. I've never had that problem. No. But I know that has been a problem in some areas, but we've always been able to get air over our jobs.
Well, I just wondered how high you
It's difficult to say how high it K is, I've seen sandstone fall in the gob behind. I know I've got 30 feet of shale, but I have seen sandstone in here. But one of the problems is if that sandstone bridges across from these pillars to these pillars and doesn't break, then we've got a problem then, because the weight starts trying to rise.
Okay, that's the first 28-minute one, and we'll have a few during the course of this. And they'll be from different sources, and I won't endear myself to any of them by having to note the sources for you from time to time, so you're aware of the fact. The National Coal Association there gave us a very valuable film, artistically done, well organized, but obviously it's not in the interest of the National Coal Association to present low-seam coal or to show the conditions under which a great many men work. And I'll point out the same things as we get them from other sources when they're working the industry over. We're going to try to see all kinds of points of view here. It's going to be important that you understand that propaganda from different sources is a necessary way to understand this. You have to take what you're given, sift out of it what you think is reasonable and intelligent, and try to make up your own mind. Let me now talk about the course. I told you we'd try to get into this film so some of the people coming in late could. Maybe if I pass these around different ways, you can send back the ones that are extra. I think these will be enough. This is the list of the course material. If you can, I wanted to review it with you and go over the what we're going to cover during these 16 sessions. And then we'll do the first of them tonight, which will be on the lifestyle of the coal miner, and we'll try to have discussion. Probably will come as close to just opening tonight, but most of them have plenty of time for questions and discussions. There won't be any textbook during the course, and for instance, we'll try to get you materials. What I'd recommend is that each of you try to pick up like a folder that has 2 pockets. If you've ever seen that type, I don't know what they sell for, about a quarter pocket at each end, so you can not have to worry about, you'll be able to pick up the things we'll get you, like reprints on a number of these items. And then if you want to make notes, you can make it on the paper in between. Have those gotten around to everyone? Are there enough of those programs available, or we have some more up here? Everyone in the room gotten these? Okay. Let's go over it together and just see if you have the general order of the course, and then we'll announce from time to time, keep this with you if you will, when we have to switch one for another, change the dates, or you can put arrows on them then or something. This one will be the introduction and the lifestyle of the miner. I've tried to indicate when we knew it what it'll consist of. We'll have a reprint for you tonight, the lecture and the slides. There'll always be discussion. Next week we'll start 2 programs on the 27th and February 3 on the industry. And we'll have people from the industry. And let me explain that I'm only going to handle 4 of these 16 myself. I'm going to handle that first one and then 3 others that you'll see alone. All of the others I'll be the moderator, bringing together the people, the experts, the films, the things that you need for your own discussion. And that'll be true on the 27th and the 3rd. We'll have a consolidation coal film. We'll have samples of anthracite, bituminous, lignite, and peat. We'll have technical explanations, booklets that'll show you cutaways in the mine, and we'll have a model cutaway of a mine here with tiny models of the equipment, things you're seeing in the film. Someone from Consol, a vice president of the Mountaineer Division, or superintendent, I forget which, will be giving us that explanation. On the 3rd, we'll continue with people present from different things and get more into management and training. And again, we'll have a film. We may, for instance, introduce you to something that doesn't exist around here, which will be low seam production, which you saw nothing of there. Very important that you understand that most miners, or close to half of them, work under very complex conditions in which they cannot stand upright. So whatever dangers exist, whatever production problems are accentuated by the complexity of low seam mining. We'll have, for instance, on the 3rd, the Mesa District Director present, but only as a resource person. On the 10th, we'll try to present not a debate or a panel as much as in series, like a Mesa representative or 2 describing their obligations under the Federal Coal Mines Health and Safety Act. Then we may have a safety manager, superintendent from a company talk about what they do to comply, and then the UMWA Safety Department discussing that. Following that, for 2 sessions, I'll handle labor history. This will be done with talks and slides, including some very rare photographs from around here and other places in the country, in which we'll give you, it'll be a short course, like all these subjects, of what could be an entire course of its own, which will be the general American labor history, starting from before the American Revolution on down to current trade union structure and organization, and throughout we'll take up mining as it existed from the Middle Ages on down, from the time that women and children worked in the mines down to women are going back into the mines, as you know. But there was a point at which progressives and humanitarians denied the operators this opportunity. But it's like men going into teaching, not going back into teaching. You know, they came out and they went back. Okay. On the 3rd, we'll have a panel of people discussing, all of whom will have been experienced. Say, the ones I've tried to select here will be people who worked at the Farmington No. 9 disaster, say the ministers in charge of the disaster thing. And then I had personal experience for the 10 days of the disaster and heading up being responsible for the medical care support of the families. What it means, the whole question of mass grief, which you don't get in combat. You get one-by-one telegrams to individuals scattered all over the country. You do not have mass grief. We hope we'll never have it again, but the industry has had it on a mass scale, and we'll talk about individually. How do people cope, you know, and how do individuals handle danger generally? On the 10th, we will not isolate the union out. They'll be able to comment throughout or participate in the program, but we'll have the union at different levels discussing whatever they conceive to be the role and safety and grievances and this kind of thing, district, possibly international, local union level. On the 17th, we'll have Any of these dates, as I indicated, might have to be switched if some of the people have to take other dates, and we'll tell you that as much as we can in advance. We'll try to present both the pension benefits and structure and the medical care program that covers coal miners in this country. On the 24th, we'll have, and you'll get, as part of what you're going to get, in place of having to buy a textbook, we're going to give you materials. We're going to give you plates of comparative lung studies, what are called Goff sections of the lung, where you'll be able to compare what the lung looks like on autopsy. You obviously can't section a lung until the man is dead. So it's always, like they used to say about the hypochondriac, who put on his gravestone, "I told you so." And a lot of miners feel that way about the black lung benefits thing when they denied it, is that you'll look at the lungs of, say, a 90-year-old school teacher who's not worked in the mines, and then you'll look at a miner's lungs, say one in a heavy volume production after 18 or 20 years, and then say a man with 40 years underground. You'll see complicated pneumoconiosis, which is very destructive. Lung tissue's about gone, and the heart's right heart failure, is implicit and all this kind of thing. And we'll have people that know what they're talking about discussing the symptomology of it and things in plain terms. You can ask plain questions. On the 31st, we'll have I don't mean that you won't be getting other pictures, but we have, you might say the opposite of what you got tonight. If this was rah, 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 and very informative, you're going to see a film presented on national TV, which feels like they've turned it into a colony, they've destroyed the people, and we've asked an industry representative to comment afterwards. We're trying to bring a balance into the thing. On the 7th, we'll try to take up objectively, statistically, what is the ownership of the industry, how has it moved, what happens in Appalachia to ownership of land, and so forth. On the 14th will be the last of the lectures I'll try to handle. I'm afraid I don't always please everybody with these, but the very title tells you about what I'm going to deal with, the decision-making process in small towns like Fairmont. And that always is dangerous. They say you can put a knife to the tiger if it's a tiger in China, but don't try to do it in a small town. And we'll discuss how the power structure functions in places like Morgantown, Clarksburg, and Fairmont. Why it's so difficult to find out who has power. How do you get them to give up some of it? How do you get them to change some? And why downtown stinks in all three towns, okay? Why the rich people won't even improve a building. Why is this? How did it happen then? There's no Rockefellers, there's no Kennedys, there's millionaires, but nobody, does anything for the community. Nobody puts anything back into the community. How did this happen? How do you end up with an establishment that don't give a damn about its community? And we'll talk about it, okay? How did it happen? Okay, there's a reason for this usually, and it's usually linked to where ownership lies and whether ownership cared about its community. And let's hope, we reach some people with this, but we'll talk as surgically as we can about it all. Just take it apart. Who runs Fairmont, okay? Who runs Morgantown? Who runs Clarksburg? And obviously, my prejudices are showing here, and they'll show throughout, so you take me on when you don't agree, okay? April 21, all these three will continue to be nice debating points. If we're fortunate as we're negotiating, we'll maybe have an official of one of the major coal companies discuss this, take the theme tonight and develop it seriously. What should we do with the Middle Eastern crisis, with the whole energy crisis, with this enormous resource of coal? And how do we balance the equities, how do we get out? Then on strip mining, the only thing you can do is try to balance it. If we show a good presentation of reclamation, you got to let an ecology person sort of go at it. If you show the ecology theme, you got to sort of let the head of the West Virginia Surface Mining Association have a shot at it. We'll try to do it one way or the other. On the 5th, we'll try to balance it the same way. If we allow a coal company guy, or if we could get the UMWA Research Department to present a thesis on the future, we'll still have to bring out all the points, like what about Western mining? What about the future of the industry? What about the future, the economics and the of the industry in relation to the needs of the country. And all of these things are subject to discussion, subject to your criticism and comments. I want to make a couple of points now that will apply during it, and I hope you'll understand and bear out the how we want to operate. I'm going to ask that nobody record during the thing because several of the speakers have asked not to be. And you'll see the only recording taking place is for the purpose of, if anybody wants to say there wasn't fairness dealt out in some fashion on either side of these questions. We're having one recording and putting it away, but some of the people would not participate, and I agreed that if there was any recording. So I would like to ask that there not be any cassette recording or other recording, because either the company people, the union people, or the Mesa people don't feel like, their comments would be as free, and you all want the benefit of candid comments as much as we can get them. Hopefully you'll get that from me, but the candor may end up kicking different people in the pants or butt on each side of the question as they come along. If there are a few technical things I must say. If anyone is not registered for the course, you can do so afterwards. I'd like Mr. Ray Alvarez to stand up. He's assisting me on the course and on anything from attendance in the rear there to registration. And then if any of you need the course for credit, because we must give grades, I'd like you to let me see the hands of people that need the course for credit, so we can, then with those of you that want it for credit, see us afterwards. It's numerous enough, so we can talk over how to substitute for examinations assignments, okay? I'm assuming that'd be better for all of us, and talk over what you can do in the way of a project, okay? Now for this particular lecture, I'm going to suggest the following. Have you put in that very small sector? Okay. I'm going to mostly dominate the thing and be just doing the talking, and then you'll be able to shoot at it afterwards. But we've got a small 7 or 8 minute sector of a film which may seem to you a little bit repetitious, but it's of a very small Kentucky town, David, in eastern Kentucky. And I'd like to just show it before we got a hold of the other one. We picked it out as a small sector, more focused on the people, even though it's put out by same way to educate in behalf of the companies and all. It's still a very small sector about the kinds of life that very small isolated communities lead in coal. Then I'm going to speak on the lifestyle of the miner, and then we're going to have some slides which I'll comment on about that bear on lifestyle, and we'll have time for discussion. Can we go again with the lights for just this small sector of about David, Kentucky?
Spotted across our country country are areas where people make a living by mining coal.
Warn you in advance not only about the prejudices or biases that I may have, which I think will be obvious to you, but that generalizations which I make throughout this presentation are obviously don't cover the vast differences between individuals. So with that understanding, you're trying to generalize in order to make a point. So let me present some aspects of the lifestyle of the coal miner to you. During a mine disaster, or when a coal strike threatens, or if union feuding reaches a bloody and violent stage, there is brief national curiosity about the American coal miner. Even that is usually directed impersonally toward doing something for the miner or in changing his situation or his union. Otherwise, the coal miner maintains his rural existence far from the nation's centers of decision and opinion making without being noticed or understood by his fellow citizens. The coal mine workforce today consists mostly of older men shaped by the Depression, labor struggle, and bitter economic experiences, and of a growing number of young miners about whom we know little and speculate much. One executive in the coal said that the average age of his men was 46, but that can remind you of a creek that had an average depth of 6 inches and yet was deep enough to drown a man. It can be quite deceptive. Many of the miners are 50 years and older, far more than in other American industries. And a large and now increasingly major force are 35 and under. So that if in general in American industry you have a great big curve, say with the biggest numbers between 25 and say 45, in coal that is seriously modified by around here, say Blacksville, both the Blacksville mines, which would probably have a majority of workers under 35, and your basically older mines which are not expanding, which will have a workforce essentially of 45 and older. And then it's modified into a plateau, that big curve, where the companies have hired well in the middle range. But in some mines it still consists of two huge curves. In other words, a tremendous number of people under 35, a tremendous number of people over 50. And this is unlike American industry in general. Young or old, the coal miner has been regarded by the American public as a kind of inferior, dirty, ignorant, substandard human. Who else would daily risk his life underground and live in such drab surroundings? The majority of miners live and work in the heartland of Appalachian bituminous coal area, stretching from southwestern Pennsylvania to northern Alabama. Here in hilly to rough terrain with few large cities and little agriculture, the population is mainly rural, clustered in settlements between hills and along creeks. Far more than his urban blue-collar counterpart, the coal miner is limited by his historically isolated life, unaltered by other experiences. Large numbers of miners and their families live in small communities which were formerly company towns. For the older miners, local influences are much stronger than the impact of national culture. Obviously, you have to add that for the younger miners, there's probably national culture as the major influence, and remarkably little difference between them, say, and steel workers or auto workers as national culture, TV, all the influences of national things rather than family and small community things move in. Kinship ties in these small communities are powerful. The husband still appears to be in charge, although the wife generally rules the paycheck, home, and children. Aside from the immediate family, it is a man's world, and the sexes usually go their separate ways socially. And this would apply to the older miners more than the equalitarian marriages of some of the younger already. As a group, miners are proud, generous, disarmingly modest about their courage and ability, hospitable and courteous. They seem to rely on a keen intuition, a practical sense of reality, and feelings unfettered by intricate codes of etiquette. Living close together, we're speaking of these small communities like Grantown, Farmington, Enterprise, Lumberport, a host of them all over this area and throughout the Appalachian area. Living close together, sharing a common background, life experience, income and educational level, daily pleasure and occupational hazard. Neighbors are responsive and helpful. Relationships are informal. Intermarriage, as between religious groups, ethnic groups, etc., are common. Church membership and status are not important, essentially. You have to modify all this. When you move into southern West Virginia, eastern Kentucky, you're going to have snake handlers, you're going to have hard-shell Baptists, you're going to have a lot of old-time mountain influences. Around this area, the biggest influence in that area, as you all know, is the loss to the Catholic Church of the ethnic groups that they normally hold on to in big cities. If you read your newspapers around here, you'll find as many intermarriages out of ethnic groups and into them as you find otherwise. So there's a total sort of mix which ends up with a sort of homogeneous whole, and I'll comment on some of that later. Although row houses have been individualized, again in these smaller communities, they are basically similar without qualitative differences worth noting. Such housing may cost only half that of a city residence to rent or to buy. Miners tend to buy new cars, color TVs, major appliances, and modern furnishings, all of which makes more sense than large home mortgages for many of them. It may offend the sociologists or the do-gooders that they, keep color TV and trade their furniture every year or two, but if you think through the mobility of many years and so forth, these things fall into place. If you don't believe that housing costs about half that from your own experience, let me assure you that people like young doctors starting out, you may recall Dr. Wong, who now could buy and sell the whole town of Barrackville, nevertheless started out by living in Barrackville. And, then when he's got it made, he moves to the country club, but people learn where the buys are. And you can live in Grantown, Baxter, any of those kind of places for about half of the same quality house, just like portions of East Side versus, West Side. Now, let's talk about the molding of the coal miner. He was molded in a particular social, economic, political setting. This is the older miner. Beginning before World War I and continuing until the mid-1930s, most of Appalachia was the arena for continual class warfare. America's last rugged frontier was not in the far west, but here. Many older miners, now working or pensioned, were raised in conditions of civil conflict, brutality, starvation, terrorism, and family degradation. Until the 1930s, mine owner dominance of the lives of coal workers and their families was complete. The owners created the mining camp or company town of necessity because coal production began in isolated areas. The operator usually provided housing, a store, water, sanitation, police, postal service, voting rights, in quotes, medical treatment, a hospital where necessary, school, church, theater, and then burial service. From start to finish, you were under the coal operator. Absentee mine ownership resulted in lack of concern about the people and the community, their aspirations and needs. Alienation of the operators from human relationships in Appalachia, linked with fear and violence which came out of the class struggle, developed a stance of snobbery toward the coal miner that became the middle class outlook of entire counties. In the face of wage cuts, discharge, blacklisting, labor spies, mass eviction of families, and company ownership of meeting places, streets, and roads, the miners repeatedly attempted to organize. The struggles that resulted were the bloodiest in the violent annals of American labor history. And to just refresh your recollection from the Ludlow Mine Massacre in Colorado, which was the Rockefeller interest, to Cabin Creek, to Paint Creek, to the whole 1920s massive struggles that took place in this whole area. The labor struggles in coal were hardly ever on a calm level. They nearly always involved violence and major aspects of civil war and conflict. Without channels for political or economic change, and denied free speech and press and the right to assemble, which was the way it was in the old days, the demands of labor were often met with the bullets of capital. The legal United Mine Workers, and this would have been way back starting around Cabin Creek in 1912, its national standards endangered, saw its Appalachian branches driven underground. Mountain miners reacting to coercion and violence with illegal organization, developed youthful leadership, even took the initiative, carried out guerrilla missions in secret, defended tent camps, battled mine guards, and mounted major military operations. You'll see some of this in the capture of weapons, which we'll show you in slides after a while. So you don't imagine that I'm writing a novel here, okay? Major military operations at times in a kind of primitive revolution, unfortunately indistinguishable from provocation by company agents. Very often their unions were infiltrated with company agents who would lead them into these, wilderness, and then they'd indict the whole leadership and, send them all to prison and end that effort. But they were frustrated people faced with enormous exploitation and brutality. They sang as they marched, like the Luddites before them in England, for the civil rights and youth movement that came later. And the song, "Which Side Are You On?" was not only a song line, but a defiant challenge too. The rough and turbulent nature of the native people may have contributed to the violent response. Many mountain counties had supported guerrilla actions against the slaveholding Confederacy during the Civil War. Indigenous coal miners were not strangers to whiskey stills, feuding, secrecy, or the marksmanship of hunters. A frequently mobile, largely uprooted or transplanted working class was thrown into strange and isolated frontier camps, often carved out of the wilderness, and you'll see some of that in the slides. Neither the black migrants from the south nor the southern and eastern European immigrants imported by railroad were accustomed to town meeting democracy. The duplicity that often surrounded their importation, the wretchedness of their daily lives, and the brutality of their treatment were not conducive to a peaceful society. The unevenness of the conflict is noteworthy. Some coal operators cared about their people and apparently made sacrifices in order to maintain jobs or improve conditions. A handful even broke with the operate as front against the Union, such as in the 1920s. Basic economic facts, rather than evil men, generally were behind the turmoil in the 1920s and 30s. Overproduction, price cutting, speculation, cutthroat competition, bankruptcy, and the Depression hit coal first, and it lasted there longest. Miners now working were children or young men during these coal labor wars. Some bear the physical, many more the emotional scars of those years. For when the miners were defeated, and I'm speaking now about the 1920s, they and their families were imprisoned. The coal camps, especially around here, were put behind fences topped with barbed wire, and armed guards stood at the gate to prevent anyone from entering or leaving without a company pass. Powerful searchlights assured no nighttime escape. Yellow dog contracts, legally signed and upheld by the courts. We'll talk about yellow dog contracts under the labor history thing, gave these concentration camps a distinctively American touch. The United Mine Workers of America have appeared to so many people to be so bureaucratic and ineffective in recent years that the Union's historic achievement is sometimes overlooked. But for Appalachian victims of brutality, eviction, and starvation, the nice people did nothing. The faculties and students of universities were equally apathetic, as these first Southern labor organizing drives failed. The UMW conducted the war against poverty. It housed, fed, and clothed its people. It fought the good fight for American civil liberties. In isolated valleys, where management repeatedly pitted foreign-born against native-born, black against white, and vice versa, group hatred boiled over. But the Union somehow taught the brotherhood of man, far from cultural centers and with the help of few intellectuals. It welded a workforce, and it created a labor solidarity that bridged racial and religious boundaries during the 1920s, when much of the rural and small town part of the nation succumbed to the Ku Klux Klan. American coal miners are not a single national group like the Welsh miners. They are a wide assortment. One estimate shows 27 nationalities working at Monongah, West Virginia in the early days. You don't want to just think of the large ethnic groups that we're used to around here now. Like in addition, to the norms of Irish, English, Scottish, Welsh, large Italian, large Polish, large Slovak, large Russian immigrants, as in these counties. But in addition, you had very rare kinds of people. You had Turks brought into Monongah. I believe you had Lebanese, you had Syrian people, many of whom are still around here, but they're not in large numbers. They didn't occur in other parts of the country as much. Down the road towards Clarksburg, you had all Spanish-speaking miners brought in for the zinc plant operations. Many of them drifted over into coal. So you had a tremendous mix throughout this area, as much as you had anywhere in the country. Nearly always imported, not only for labor shortage purposes, but very often they were always brought in to break another group's strikes, so that if the Irish were brought in originally to break the English and the Welsh miners' strikes, then they in turn began to organize after they had enough of it. Then they'd bring the blacks in from Alabama. If the blacks caught on, they began joining the Union 10, 15 years later, then they'd bring in another nationality. And you can find the companies just playing it up and back in those years. And it was a miserable effort which we've described here that was able to be reversed. Today you have many opposite manifestations. Some of the most enlightened personnel policies are in some of the companies now, in terms of trying to maintain balances, avoid discrimination. And actually the Island Creek personnel man told me at a dinner some time ago that the biggest problem they have is maintaining the ratios of black miners. That the immigration out of young, intelligent blacks to the big cities means they can't maintain in Island Creek mines the ratios of black miners at high pay that they'd like to, and they see a sinking of the ratio of black miners. So that management has taken over many of these concerns now that the basic education's been done. Considering the circumstances, the wonder is not at the initial or continuing friction, but at how well people came together without serious ethnic or racial tensions. Perhaps the experience of mining develops a sense of community. Some kind of melting pot, a native and ethnic blend, has come about amongst the whites. Racial discrimination has not disappeared, but in coal towns there is an easygoing dialogue and social intercourse between blacks and whites without the ugly polarization of the cities. I doubt that racially mixed married couples can live comfortably in many places in the United States, but they do in several West Virginia communities, each with a population under 2,500. Some UMW locals with less than 20% black membership regularly elect Negroes to 2 out of 4 major offices. That's true right around here. Several of the locals have traditionally elected black officers, although the blacks have declined to 10% or less than the membership. They simply elect people on the basis of their intelligence or their judgment, or they're being settled or capable of speaking for them. Small communities may seem so lacking in the amenities of modern life by middle-class standards that it may be easy to miss their significance in lifestyle. Compare bustling and growing metropolitan Charlotte, North Carolina, which Harry Golden once described the lack of ethnic diversity. And quoted in the Wall Street Journal, he said, "There are no Italians, no Hungarians, no Slavs. The absence of these ethnic groups has watered down the intellectuality and culture here. Whether he, the average white Charlotte resident, looks, wherever he looks, he sees an image of himself, the same religion, the same ideas, the same prejudices." And it's a fascinating comparison with what we think of as a benighted area like Grantown. You sure as hell can't say Grantown has the same prejudices, the same people. They're all, a complete mixture, and all of these towns are for the most part. It is within the context of his history and background that the underground working experience of the miner becomes understandable. Now, I'm going to go into the miner's underground experience and the reasons why the intellectuals and media people sometimes don't believe that miners choose to be miners with a free choice, and deal with that. But before I do, I'd like to take up what it is some of these commentators and behavioral and social analysts who have studied miners, what they've developed in theses that I think are wrong. Let me give you 5 things that have been said in the literature. 1, the mine worker is filled with penetrating fears and apprehensions. Each of these are footnoted as to which behavioral scientist said these things. He's filled with penetrating fears and apprehensions. The stoical mountain man is a victim of intense anxieties. Lacking in confidence, he has marked sensitivities about his personal worth, deep-seated feelings of inferiority, an unsurpassed sense of dependency and of inadequacy. Okay? And just so that you don't imagine I'm making these up, that's a combination taken out of Weller's Yesterday's People, 2 psychiatrists writing in the American Journal of Psychiatry, Lance out of the People of Coal Town, and Harry Caudle's Night Comes to the Cumberland. Combination of statements they've made, okay? Take number 2. In Jack Weller's Yesterday's People, he sees the miner as having a regressive outlook, being existence-oriented, not ready and eager for new ideas and experiences, no rebellion, little questioning, little complaining. was all written before the MFD revolution that overthrew Boyle, and a few other things in which the miner didn't exactly meet this image. And I'd hate for Weller to have to meet some supervisors that have to deal with these young guys today that would make these statements, okay? 3, a psychiatrist thinks that the miner grew up dependent, lost self-sufficiency and independence, and was not attuned to group activity. 4, a professor of social work, actually one of the professors at Morgantown, views the coal mining region of Appalachia as a semi-primitive, socially unintegrated area where citizens are dominated by suspicion and fear, an overwhelming multitude of resigned, apathetic, and willing victims. The rural Appalachian has an unrealistic notion of manhood, tough and sentimental, prizing silence and masking feelings in an effort to dignify a fundamental inarticulateness. They prefer working with objects rather than people. Many are conservative, bigoted, obsessed with the past and its preservation, trapped hopelessly, okay? Now, this guy actually invites me to lecture at his classes over in Morgantown. I just associated his name. I picked it up as his article to quote him, but he actually has me over to speak on lifestyle of the miners. And I see I better throw this at him next time and ask him if he still feels this way. And lastly, just so you realize the kind of literature, not just that's written in the media. This is a psychiatrist in the Southern Medical Journal in 1970. And he presents what I call a social Darwinian thesis about rural Appalachians, whom he says, these cultural primitives, descended from the non-industrial outcasts and beggars on the fringe of British society, and from its debtor or criminal prisons, escape bonded indenture to the isolated mountains in order to avoid work, which they dislike more than jail, and society. Stealing, moonshining, producing illegitimate children, drinking, wasting free food, lacking in love, affection, and loyalty. They live together not by design, but because they are excluded by others. In coal mine villages, they spend their money on outrageous extravagances and live in indolence, dirt, and unattractive communities. Fundamentally uncivilized people, they are incapable of taking their place in modern America. Well, I'd contend that most of these conclusions obscure more than they disclose, and they reveal more about the authors of such studies than they do about the subjects of the study. They tend to focus, people like that, on human defects as though they were genetic rather than economic or social. Considering the fact that coal miners are engaged in a very hazardous occupation, most make a remarkable adjustment and a decent adjustment to reality. If they express sharp sensitivities about how others view their work, the experts might examine carefully the contempt, segregation, and ostracism which surrounded them over the years. Now, what I'd like to do is review now the miner's work experience with you, in which I take a somewhat different thesis than those who contend that the miner is forced into his occupation. Because the gloomy darkness is oppressive and the work of the miner inherently dangerous and dirty, it has seemed to some scholars that no man with an alternative would select coal mining as an occupation. Support for this point of view has come from interviews with miners about whether they would want their sons to go into the mines. Some studies took place during years when the threat to mine employment was so serious that the economics of the situation was a principal component in their replies, I believe. The American intellectual can hardly imagine today's miner thinking of himself as having a decent job. Conditioned by 19th century social novels, the brutal history, or a current movie like Molly Maguire's that's been out in recent years, they have little understanding of present-day coal mines or workers. Coal miners actually have a proud sense of occupational identity that helps them define themselves, an identity that is often lacking in other industrial workers. Although it is difficult to prove where no blue-collar alternatives exist, I believe a large number of men select coal mining as an occupation of their own free will and choice. But the miner may not express this to a strange interviewer. Remember, there is a saying, niggers and coal diggers, and the snob society that looks down on him expects the miner to state that his decision to work in the mines was involuntary. Today, there are, in my opinion, many reasons why some coal miners select and enjoy their occupation. One, most men underground are operators of large machines or mechanics, electricians, or other craftsmen. Craftsmen have pride in their work. There is a sense of importance and action in being trustee of large, heavy, and expensive equipment. And men have been known to stay too long in a roof fall situation because they did not want to lose their machines like a cowboy with his horse. Two, compared to the firm discipline and monotony of factory assembly line production, there is considerable freedom and little direct supervision in the mines even today, most certainly in the early days of independent output, where they went into separate rooms, didn't have supervisors over them, and came out at the end of a half a shift or a shift. The average work day at the face is about 6.5 hours, but transportation bottlenecks often prevent the main machine, like a continuous mining machine, from operating more than 2 or 3 hours. Foremen are somewhat limited in the same way that combat officers are, in that it is unwise to lean on the men in a common setting of danger. Coal management is aware of this and cognizant of their vulnerability for years by omitting foremen increasingly from grievance sessions. They may tell it like it is and upset the whole grievance. 3, the boredom of repetitive factory work can be avoided in the mines. Usually job switching is allowed during the shift or during the week. Now, some of this is changing. You know, I'm saying here, those of you that know the industry may say, well, that is no longer true at this operation or that one. There's some customary changes here or some contractual changes. But imagine job switching and compare it with the boredom of an assembly line. If you allow job switching during the shift or during the week, it may mean that men may generally be permitted to develop their own job trading arrangements, so that one man may operate a continuous miner for half a shift, the other man be a shuttle car, buggy operator half a shift. The union contract rotating lunch provision, I haven't looked it up under the new negotiations, guarantees variety of work by the very rotation of lunches. And on Saturdays and other idle days, there's grading bottom, there's rock dusting, there's conveyor work, there's track laying, pumping, roof bolting, hanging wire, etc. The coal miner often resembles an all-around man or a general practitioner. And this is a very important component to the extent that companies don't change the situation in satisfaction with the job. 4, the mine face crew usually achieves a teamwork and esprit de corps as finely honed as that of a combat squad. I'm talking about guys where you really miss them if they're out. You have an absentee guy or a guy sick or injured or something, because if a group is working together, you can really get production, and you really are set back where a key person's missing. Company and union in the past have appeared to allow the internal adjustments necessary to achieve this teamwork, even though occasionally it has meant transferring a man by crew consensus without achieving that teamwork, or to the extent that management or union interfere with it. Minimum levels of production will not be reached. With teamwork and that esprit de corps, Certain implicit rules of team solidarity apply. Joint decision-making, some worker discretion on issues. Older men very commonly refuse foreman jobs out of the traditions I spoke of. And the result of all this is often an unstructured limitation on management prerogatives, but they may get the production out extremely well. We're not talking about the impact of the Health and Safety Act on production, not talking about other factors. We're talking about the human teamwork problems at the mines. 5, there's less alienation of the worker from the product in coal than in other industries. Now think about that a minute. Suppose you're making deodorant spray. You're not exactly, you don't wear a badge about that and go into the bars, and sell what you're doing. Think about you making some silly little plastic device, or something. The miner is not a cipher divorced from the extraction process. He understands the materials, what he does, the strategy of extracting the coal, how his job fits into the overall pattern. His daily travel underground gives him an overview of the entire operation, past and present. He's getting a sense of history, where the mine was in past years. The mine is a place of rapidly changing scenes, altering circumstances, geological pioneering. This flexible situation brings about changing rhythms in the work. He is and has been essential to the nation. What he produces is necessary for the common good. That can lead to a feeling towards his industry and his production. 6, underground miners probably relate to one another in a more realistic and more supportive fashion than other industrial workers. The regular Joe style of coal miners can be characterized as open, friendly, helping but tough, hostile to the company but not lazy, blunt, unvarnished feelings along with tolerance, always sharing and never cheap, everyone with a nickname indicating individual acceptance into the group. A social solidarity recognizing individualism that is quite attractive today in an impersonal and alienated world. 7, some young miners are from families where the father was an occasional or low-wage worker, or from broken homes, from homes where the family had been on welfare, or from rural homes in more isolated hollows with even less sophistication than a mining town. And all of you know that's true, the people who come from somewhere in Wetzel County and quite pleased with Mannington or, Farmington or towns like that. Go look at the hollow they came out of and you'll understand it a little better, okay? This is upward mobility, as the sociologists say, and you all are on warning that I have not had courses in either sociology or psychology, but they tell me this course is credited to both of them, so we'll discuss that afterwards. 8, everything is relative. A coal miner today with stable employment is able to provide a decent level of family income and security in a community environment that is congenial to him and that has a below-average cost of living. In no other industry can a young man make comparable wages without a long apprenticeship. 9, and last, the coal miner and the women's libbers, I'm not asking their forgiveness, that what has to be modified here is that it's a statement of fact about 99 and 84 100ths or so of the workforce. The coal miner is a male in a masculine industry compared to any other industry, where others essentially fear to tread. He is opening and developing territory never seen before. And not all men wish to be pencil pushers, and you can put that down for women. And the hunting, fishing type of man may find in coal mining something like the satisfaction others get from skin diving, high-rise construction, or motorcycle riding. And that is the reason why a number, perhaps a small number even permanently, of women will find this a very satisfying and rewarding occupation because they're not typical, you know, of the mass of women in that sense. And that's very chauvinist, and probably the more I talk, the worse I put my foot into it, so the best thing you can do is shut up on that. It's an industry which is open to women, but I think the point I'm making here still has an essential thrust, since there are so many men of the male sex who would be afraid to go into the mines, that the miners going in and those women who go in have a certain sense of pride in doing so. Now, miners, although resenting the way in which they are looked down upon by others, may not articulate the sources of pride or satisfaction they have in their occupation. And this is not to deny, and I want to make this plain, that there is an ambivalence or that elements of inertia, tradition, or habit bear on the decision to be a miner. In certain southern West Virginia and eastern Kentucky towns, it is true, there is no choice. If you don't go into the mines, you got to leave town. There is no other industry. There is no such explanation possible in Monongalia County, Marion County, Harrison County, in this area where there is a pretty wide industrial choice, where there's a growing range of opportunities and more manufacturing jobs than there are mining jobs, and where construction and other things have opened up. And I think there's some validity to the reason why a great many miners have made this choice that the sociologists have not agreed to yet. Studies may conclude that coal miners were generally forced into their occupation lacking any alternatives, but this is now true for only some of the men. Union loyalists, tried and true, the older men are the majority of mine workers today. The miner under 30 often appears hostile to both company and union, as well as cynical and disillusioned. Essentially an undisciplined, action-seeking person, often from a mixed ethnic or different cultural background from the older man, far more influenced by television and national norms. The young worker is unlikely to accept the older miner's relationship to the union uncritically. And what you've seen happening politically, I developed this thesis long before the revolt in the union on most of these points, and was saying these things, is simply being borne out. The young overwhelmingly voted for the revolution inside the union, you know, to oust war. The young overwhelmingly have put into office the young officers that are coming forward. The young may overwhelmingly be voting down the contract, even though it's negotiated by Mr. Miller, who was elected, you know, substantially by them. Where this is all leading, we don't know, but I think this thrust is certainly there. The young come increasingly from outside the coal towns, from non-miner families, and they are high school graduates compared to the older men. Many like horsepower on 2 wheels, 4 wheels, or water. They love sports and fishing like their elders. They seem to drink somewhat less. They're bright. Some are wild and try to work